Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to learn how to query a database from Notion in a React app. If you're not too familiar with Notion, it's kind of like an organizational documentation, note-taking, kind of anything that you can imagine, cloud-based, multi-team member, multiple users can edit at the same time, sort of collaboration tool. So it does quite a lot. It's worth looking into. Watch some videos about it. And one of the great things that it has is an API. So all of the data that you put into your workspace, you can query it and you can use it in the apps that you built. So that's what we're going to teach you how to do today with this video. So I've created an account, a personal account, which is free. It only costs for multiple users on a team. I've created an account and I'm just starting with the Getting Started page right here. Now I'll show you how to create a database in Notion. So we're going to click Add a Page. I'm going to call it My Cool Project. And within this project, I'm going to create another new page. So I'll just start with empty here. Type /page to create a new page. Select that. And this is going to be things to learn in 2022. And this is where I'm going to create a database of type table. And you can see it creates a database for me here. So the name column by default is the title. It's kind of like the primary key. So this you want to keep as a unique value that represents each one of your rows so you can do lookups. But aside from that, I'm going to do the label of the thing that I want to learn, and we're going to do the URL. So I'm going to have a list of different technologies and then links to what resource to learn them. So I've gone through and added in the values here. Node, React, and TypeScript, and then a nice formatted label that will display on our app, and links to each one of these. And I've set this column here, label, to property type text. And I've set this column here to property type URL. Next, in order to give our app permission to read this database, we need to create what's called an integration. So to create an integration in Notion that has permission to read your database, you're going to go to developers.notion.com, click on Get Started, and you're looking for this link here, create an integration, notion.com/myintegrations. You're going to create a new integration. You're going to give it a name, so My Cool Project. You can give it read, update, or insert permissions. We're only going to be reading this database, so I'm not going to give it any more permissions than it needs. And I don't want this integration to have the ability to request any user information. So a very simple read-only permission for My Cool Project. We submit that, and then we're going to get a secret token. Now you're going to want to keep track of that because we're going to need it when we create our Node server. So I don't mind showing you this secret token later because by the time I upload this video, I will have deleted this whole project, but you'll be able to follow along while we do this. The last thing you need to do, once you've created it, is go back to your database, go up to the top corner and click Share, click Invite, and you'll see the integration you just created from My Cool Project. Select it and invite, and now that integration has permission to read from this database. And you've got everything that you need in order to go and start creating your server. So here I have this blank VS Code project. I'm going to begin by opening up the terminal, Control-tilde, if you don't know that command, and I'm going to create a React app. So I'm going to use create React app because it's very simple, easy way to set one up. So npx create React app at latest. I'll zoom in a little bit here for you. I'm going to call it sample app, and the template is TypeScript. Hit enter and let that run. Once it's finished, as it has here, we test to make sure that it works by going into the directory, cd sample app, and then npm run start. Hit enter, and it should pop up a window visiting localhost 3000 and showing the sample app. And there we have it. So that's all we need to do now for the React app. We have that ready to go. Now we need to create the server that's going to query the Notion database and provide the data for our React app. So let's jump back to our VS Code. I'm going to stop the React app. I'm going to go back to the root directory. So I'm back in my root directory for the whole project. And I'm going to create another directory beside sample app, the React app, and I'm going to just call it server. So make dir server, or I could right click and say new folder over here, same thing. And then I'm going to go into the server directory. I'm going to make a directory called source, src. And in that directory, I'm going to create a new file called server.ts. And this is where I'm going to write my server. But first, I need to initialize the project. So inside the server directory, not the source directory, the server directory, I'm going to run npm init-y, which will initialize a new project in the server directory. It will give me my package.json file. And then I'm going to run npm install -d for developer dependencies, TypeScript, and node types at types/node. So those are now added to my project. I have TypeScript as a dependency, and I'm going to initialize TypeScript with npx tsc --init. And that will create a tsconfig.json. And the only thing that I need to change from the defaults here is outdir, the output directory. So I've got my TypeScript file, server.ts, in the source directory, and I just want it to, where's outdir? I know it's here. There it is. The output directory is going to be current directory /dist. And that's it. So when I run TypeScript based on the default config, it should convert my server.ts file into a server.js file in a dist folder. So let's try that. We'll say console.log hello, and then we will run npx package runner tsc for TypeScript, and that's it. That's all we need. It's going to automatically read the tsconfig file. And if I look up here, it created a dist folder with server.js that says console.log hello. So we now have TypeScript set up for our server. And lastly, before we start writing the server code, let's make sure that we have a script to run it. So in package.json, I'm going to get rid of this test script. I'm going to create a start script, and I'm going to say the same thing that we just did. So tsc to compile the TypeScript. You don't need npx when you're writing it inside a package.json file. It will understand that on its own. So compile the TypeScript and then run with node dist/server.js, the JavaScript file that we output into the dist folder. So every time I run npm run start, it's going to compile the TypeScript file and then run the JavaScript output. So let's save and give that a try. npm run start. Hello, it works. Awesome. Okay, let's start writing our server. So inside server.ts, here is what we're going to write. I'm going to paste it here and then explain how it works. So this, nothing about Notion yet. We're just getting a really simple server setup that can send data to our app. And it's so simple, we're not even going to use Express or any libraries like that. We're just going to import the HTTP module directory And you can decide what framework or anything like that you want to use when you do it yourself. So import HTTP. Our host is going to be localhost. We're going to serve the data on port 8000. And then we say server is create server. We set the access control origin header to allow all origins. That's if you ever have trouble with CORS errors, as I often have in the past, this will take care of those. Obviously, you want to set that to something else with a little more protection if you're actually releasing this as a real app. But for practicing and working on it, this gets rid of your errors. Our content type that we return is going to be JSON. So content type application JSON. And then we check the URL of the request. That's basically going to be, localhost / whatever. And we're just going to serve that data on the root domain / set the status of 200, everything's good. And we're going to send back the response with an object, JSON object, data success. And to convert it from a JavaScript object to JSON, we use json.stringify. And that's it. And 404 error for requests to anything other than the root domain. So what we're expecting is to be able to say, send a GET request to localhost 8000 and get this JSON data in response. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to now do npm run start. It says it's listening on port 8000. So let's find out if that's true. We'll go back, close up server for now. We're done with the server. Go back to our React app. In the React app, I'm going to get rid of the default app CSS file. Get rid of the logo too. Why not? We don't need it. I'm going to copy a little bit of pre-built CSS. You can get this from the repository and the link in the video description. It's very simple. It's just, get rid of this default stuff here. It's basically copied and pasted some simple CSS to make things look nice and clean, but without any kind of opinionated styles. And then we're going to delete the default copy of app and replace it with a simple version, pretty similar. It gets rid of the logo and the spinning and all that kind of stuff. Just an H1 that says things to learn and a button. And all the button does is on click, we're going to use the browser's fetch to fetch from localhost 8000, get the response, convert the response to JSON, then take that JSON payload and console.log it. So I'm going to open up another terminal here. So I'm still running the server's still running in the background. I didn't close it. I just opened a second terminal, and I'm going to run npm run start to start the React app. Oh, that's not correct. I'm not in the app directory. cd sample app, then npm run start. So this is going to boot up the React app. Open this again. It's going to give me an error because it can't find logo.svg, which I thought I deleted, and I did, but I didn't save after I pasted. So let's save that. Looks a little happier now. Open up the React app. Button, fetch the list. Clicking that should trigger the fetch command. I'll zoom in so you can see better here. Got my console. Fetch from my Node server that we just wrote, and it returns data success. So our React app is connected to our Node server. So everything is ready. Now we can connect our Notion database. So now I'm going to go back to my source, close the sample app, the React app. We're going to open up the server directory. I'm going to create a new file called .env. And this is where we're going to put our secret values that we don't want to share with other people. So that includes our Notion integration secret and our database ID. So copy this little template here. Notion secret equals Notion database ID equals, and we're going to replace these placeholder values with our actual values. So if I open my browser, the cool project integration that I created, I'm going to show the token, and I'm going to copy it and place it here as my secret. Save that. Then I'm going to go back. I'm going to open up the database, and in the URL here, you'll see that after notion.so, you have a string that goes about halfway, just up to, but not including a question mark. So there's like kind of a hash string, then question mark v equals, and another one. You want the first one before the question mark v equals. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to place that as my Notion database ID. And you're going to try and ignore my singing baby in the background. Then I'm going to create a .getignore file. And the reason I'm doing this is to make sure that if I do eventually initialize this as a Git repository, that the .env file is not going to be included. So we're not going to include these secret values when we push it to our repository. And that's how we keep them secret to ourselves, and other people who are cloning the repo can put in their own env file and credentials. We also don't want to upload node modules from either one of our projects, and we don't want to upload the dist folder from our server, because that's generated automatically. So next, we're going to update our server to query the database. So before we were just responding with data success. Now we want to respond with the actual Notion data from that database we created with the things to learn. So again, I'm going to copy a template, and I'll just explain to you how it works, and you can get the code from the repository in the video description. So I'm going to delete that and replace. So all that code that we wrote is still here. We've just added a little bit more to it. And apparently I have an error in my... Yeah, we'll get there. Oh, I know why. Okay, so before, I'm going to open up my server terminal, and I'm going to close the server because we're updating it. I have to install a new package, npm I, and it's going to be at Notion HQ /client at 0.4.9. And I'm just locking it this version because I know they're constantly updating it. Sometimes they change the API, and I know this version works for this video and for the repository that I've created. So if you want to update it to the latest and hopefully nothing changes, that's great. But this version works quite well for what we have right now. So that gets installed. Just gonna close and reopen this file. Error goes away. Okay, so I'm going to begin with importing the client from Notion/client. I'm going to create a TypeScript interface for the shape of the data we want to send back. And you remember from the chart that we made, we had a label and a URL. So basically Node.js and a link to Node.js website. So this will enforce to make sure that we properly create the shape that we want to return to the front end. I'm going to create values from the env file that I just created. So process.env, Notion database ID, Notion secret matches database ID and secret, and you get them from process.env. And to do that, we have to use the .env package. So I also need to install .env. There was two packages, that's right. So .env, and that's the package that reads in this .env file into your process.env variable. So we save that as Notion database ID and Notion secret. And if either one of them doesn't exist, we remind the user they must create an env file with those values. Next, we initialize the Notion client, and that's where we use that secret from the integration we created. This is the same as before, localhost 8000. This is the same as before. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead here. Our error is the same as before, and the ending, same as before. What we've changed is the data that we send back on the root directory. So any request to localhost 8000 will now send back data from our Notion database. So this has to be an async function because we're going to await notion.databases.query, and the database ID is the other secret value, Notion database ID, which we pulled from our env file. Then, once we get that back, the query from the database comes back in a pretty complex shape. That's one of the reasons I really like using TypeScript with Notion, is because you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes trying to pull those values off. You can read their documentation for the API and see how it all works. But as long as you follow the TypeScript labels and check the types of each thing, then you know that you'll be getting the data that you're looking for. So I want to return the data in the shape of an array of things to learn, which is a label and a URL object. So I'm going to map the results of my query, which returns one row from each database. So that query is going to return all the data in this row for the first iteration, all the data in this row for the second iteration, all the data in this row for the third iteration, and we can reference the data based on a property on each row that is named after the names of our columns, label and URL. So the label cell will be on row.properties.label, the data in the URL cell, row.properties.url. Next, we have to check the types of them, and that's for TypeScript, because depending on what type of data we set, remember when we right-clicked the header and said this column is text and the other one, this column is a URL, depending on what we select there, the data will be in a different shape when it gets returned. So cell.type is rich text, and confirm that the URL cell, the type is URL. And you can see if I hover here, these are all the different types of columns that you can create in Notion, and each one of them will have a different shape. So presuming that our data is the types that we say it is, we can access the text in the cell off rich text, which is an array. So the text that we want, just the basic text, will be at the position 0. I'm honestly not sure why it's an array. I guess you could have multiple text values in a cell. And we just want the plain text from there. So you could see what I was talking about when I said the Notion response is fairly complex. So that's why TypeScript helps a lot. And we know that that value here is going to be a string. And for a URL, the value is stored in the cell.url. And if there isn't anything there, we've just fall back to an empty string. And lastly, we return it, label URL. And you can see that it's happy, it's conforming to our shape. If we, use the wrong property like name, for example, instead of label, we'd get an error. So we know that we've done it right. Thanks, TypeScript. And if none of these rules, we do all of our checks, if any of them fail, we're just going to return something that still follows the same shape, but it says not found, so that we know when we look at the page that, oops, we made a mistake, or the data in one of our rows is missing or doesn't follow the rules. And that's it. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to run npm run start again for the server. Don't see any errors. I'm going to go back to the browser. I'm going to go back to my React app. I'm going to hit the fetch list, and we'll see that our response is an array, and it's our Notion data. So we're doing really good right now. So if you know your React, you can probably take it from here. The data's there, but I'll wrap this up quick by, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the shape of that interface from my server, just to make it easier to work with in React, the label and the string. Close up the server, we're all done with the server. Open my React app, app.tsx. I'm going to put the interface up there at the top so I have access to it. I'm going to want a state variable that's going to hold that array of Notion data. So const list set list is equal to use state, and we're going to start with an empty array because when we load it up, we're not going to have access to that Notion data. You could do like a use effect or a query hook or something if you wanted to have it pop up right away. We're just not going to do that here. Keep it really simple. The type of the array is going to be things to learn. Oh, things to learn array. And then we're going to, once we get that list back below the button, let's put it inside an ordered list because it's a list of things that we want to learn one at a time. And we will take that list and map it out. And what we're going to get back from the data, each one of them is the list item, the row, basically. I'm just going to call it row for now. And we're going to return a list item with we'll make it an anchor because remember we have the URL as well. So anchor href is going to be the row.url, and the text of the anchor is going to be the row.label. And since we're returning an array in React, we always want to set the key and keep it simple. We're just going to use the index. And basically that's just for React to keep track of when you have a dynamic list of items being rendered to give a unique identifier to them. And since we're not changing the list at all, the index from iterating over the map, iterating over the list with map one by one, will give us a unique key. So 0, 1, 2, 3 for each row. And the last thing that we need to do is when we get our payload from the server, I'm going to type it because I know the shape of it now. It is a thing to learn array. Instead of console.logging it, we can keep console logging it. We're going to set the list state of our component equal to the payload, that array. And we know that we did it right because we don't have any TypeScript errors. I'm going to save. This has been running for a while. I think it may have lost the hot reloading. I'm just going to boot it up again. Okay, server's running. Go back to my component here. And I'm just going to refresh the screen. Click the fetch list button. And look, TypeScript, Node, React. I click on TypeScript. Takes me to TypeScript website. So if I go back to my app, and then let's say I go back to the database, and I add a new row, like something else that I want to learn, CSS, why not? CSS, what's the website for CSS? Let's say www.css.com. And then back to my app again, and I fetch the list. Look at that, updated right away, because it's reading direct from the database. So that's really neat. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do with that. There's a lot more you can do. Then there's lots more different types of data you can store in a Notion database, and the API does more than just read databases. It can read pages and all kinds of different parts from a Notion workspace. So check out the documentation, check out more about the API, and you could use this basic concept to read in all kinds of different data and build different kinds of apps and little projects doing anything you could imagine. So have fun with it. Thanks for watching.